Okay, good morning. I'm going to point out a couple of the tournament rules before I get started on any more of my other videos. I've said before that this is one of my favorite versions of Axis and Allies, and I think I should point out the tournament rules before I get started on any other videos because that would lead to a lot less confusion for people who actually watch this video or my videos. I do a lot of videos. Anyway, one of the problems with this game was that you were only able to move one territory. And very often it was hard to get troops to the front to battle the enemy. This was no more of a problem. Well, this was more of a problem over here on the Western Front. Germany had an issue getting troops over to France to actually make a push into France. And France, who typically has the war on their territory, very often were still in reach of their supply lines, which a lot of people say evened out the disadvantage that they had with the Germans. The Germans have way more IPCs than they do, and their armies start out way bigger. So when Germany moves into Belgium, the French can obviously attack into Belgium and continuously funnel troops from Paris, which is their home station, into Belgium. So the war was often very hard for the Germans, and the game would just last forever. It would be a steady buildup on the Western Front, and around turn 4, the United States would come in. By then, Germany and Austria most likely will have knocked out Russia. And even then, it would be hard enough to get troops back from the east to the west when they're all moving one territory at a time. The game was way too slow and really not fun for a lot of people. In all truth, railways were invented at the time, and troops were able to move much faster than they do on this board. So that's where the tournament rules come in. In the tournament rules, troops can actually move by rail. And by rail, I mean they can move 2 territories. So let's say the Russians want to move from Sevastopol. They can go 1, 2 to Poland. Just like that, you have all these troops moving in from the east. 2 territories at a time. And before you know it, the Russian horde is descending upon you from the east, and the bear has woken up. The tournament rules really fix the problem with movement. It's all by train, supposedly. And I feel that these movement rules really enhance Russia's gameplay. It's way more optimal. The Russian player is able to adapt to more situations, and Russia, which doesn't have a lot of roads, is able to compensate for its great distances with the railways. Germany can do the same thing. They can invade Belgium, and after they invade Belgium and destroy the units that are there, any units here in Hanover can move into Belgium, and any units here in Kiel can double move into Belgium. The troops in Berlin will probably take an extra turn to get there because they can go from Hanover to Ruhr, but they still won't be in Belgium. They can go from Kiel to Ruhr. But even then, they won't be in Belgium. The Germans can conquer Belgium on the first turn. If they don't, that's really just bad luck, honestly. And once they conquer Belgium, all other troops that need to move to the front can move in on the non-combat phase. If they don't take Belgium, however, they have to stop in Ruhr, get off the railroad, and then move into Belgium the next turn, which would actually give France more time to get into Belgium. However, very often this is not the case because Belgium very often does not last past the first turn. So you'll have this influx of German troops into Belgium, just like in the actual First World War. And before you know it, history is way more accurate and history is repeating itself with more troops on the way. The troops from Berlin will move from Kiel to Ruhr, but they have to stop because they can only move 2 spaces. That is another example of the railroad. Despite how much these movement rules actually suit Russia the best, these railroads actually allow Germany to coordinate with Austria-Hungary much better also. Let's just say Germany wants to help Austria-Hungary out in Galicia. Let's say Russia invaded Galicia on its turn. Germany can take these troops and use the railroad down through Silesia and into Galicia. Or these reserve troops in Hanover, they can move through Bohemia and into Galicia also. Now you have German troops in Galicia. These rules regarding the railroad allow the Central Powers to communicate much better and coordinate much better through movement. Shuffling troops in this game is critical, especially on stagnated fronts that need it. And that's the tournament rules for you. Well, at least regarding movement. In the tournament rules also, these harbors. In the tournament rules, these harbors, let's say that this battleship has been injured. Battleships can actually take 2 hits. So let's say they got hit during the last combat and the battleship is damaged. It's going to be damaged for the rest of the game. But if it's near a friendly harbor, the next turn it's healed. Or next round it's healed. Also, battleships, cruisers, transports, and submarines, all naval units, which can only move 2 spaces, only 2. If it takes off from a harbor, it can actually move 3. So let's say the United States needs to shuffle troops over to Europe as fast as possible. Takes off from a harbor. Its transports, its navy can go 1, 2, 3. This is just an example. These harbors make movement much, much better. Even cruisers, which are said to already have a movement of 3, only in tournament rules. In tournament rules, cruisers can already move 3. They're the fastest moving ship. However, from harbors, it gives them an extra movement of 1, which leads to 4. So basically, taking off from harbors, cruisers can move 4 instead of 3. The harbor always allows 1+ movement for whatever ship is leaving the port. What else? Oh, so if you notice, France has 2 battleships. England only has 1. Of course, they have a battleship over here, but it makes no sense how the French Navy has just as big a navy as the English. In tournament rules, they're removed from the game. and they're replaced by a cruiser. Also, Germany. You notice Germany has a way bigger home fleet in the Atlantic, along with these, counting these U-boats, of course, than England. England has the same fleet here as Germany. Despite there being a transport, it should be bigger than that of Germany. Germany typically always won in the original game whenever there was a naval engagement. England gets a second battleship. Historically accurate. Down here in Africa, where pretty much the Germans have more troops than they really should, the Germans never had troops in Togoland. Take them out. The Germans never had troops in Cameroon. Take them out. The Germans did historically have troops in East Africa and Southwest Africa, but that leaves the Germans severely outnumbered. This is what Africa should look like, according to the tournament rules. France never had troops in West Africa. Also historically accurate. These rules are not only supposed to make the game more historically accurate, but also to eliminate a lot of glaring weaknesses. In tournament rules, there is something called economic and political collapse. These are the numbers. For example, Austria has 13. Austria has a total of 26 IPCs. If they lose a total of 13 IPCs worth of territories, then they are not allowed to buy any more units and collect any more income until they gain some of that territory back. If they lose 16 IPCs worth of territories, as soon as they lose that territory or that territory is even contested, they go into political collapse and they are removed from the game. Here's an example of this. Let's say the Russians decide to attack into Mesopotamia and they defeat the Ottomans. That's 3 IPCs that the Ottomans have lost. They can, later on in the round, on the Ottomans' turn, later on in the round, they can attack back into Mesopotamia and contest it. They can try to push the Russians out of Mesopotamia, but let's say that they don't do enough damage. And let's say they lose some soldiers too. That this territory is now contested. It may not be Russia's territory, but it is still contested, and the Ottoman Empire cannot collect money from this territory. That's 3 IPCs. Let's say that the British invade Transjordan. Let's say they lose some soldiers too. The Ottomans cannot collect IPCs from this territory. Granted, it's only 1. Now, once again, let's say the Italians take a transport and they invade Surma. Granted, this invasion would not work because it is clearly too small of an invasion. But as long as you can contest the territory, and make sure that territory is a battleground, then they can't collect IPCs from it. So the Ottomans will have to wait till their next turn to remove the Italians and remove the Russians, hopefully in an attack that will succeed. If it doesn't succeed in wiping out the Russians entirely, then that territory will be contested again for another round and they won't collect the income. This is why the Ottoman Empire falls so quickly during actual games. Because whenever the Ottoman Empire falls, or whenever the Ottoman Empire is invaded, very often it doesn't have the troop movement that it needs or the soldiers that it needs to push the Allied powers out of its territory. And very often it can only afford to go in one direction and is not able to attack in multiple directions like it did during the First World War. They made the mistake of attacking in too many places at once, and that ended up leading to their downfall. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Looking at my little chart. Ottoman Turkey. If they lose 7 IPCs, they go into economic collapse. If they lose 1 more IPC worth of territory, then they can't buy any more units and they cannot collect any income. If they lose 9 IPCs worth of territory, right then and there, they are eliminated from the game, period. It's only been the first turn and they've already lost 6 IPCs worth. That's only an example. That is the tournament rules. In the tournament rules, the Russian Revolution optional rule is not used. In the Russian Revolution optimal rule, which was a part of the original game, the Central Powers would have to conquer Poland, take at least 3 Russian territories, and contest Moscow. So, let's say all these Russian forces were eliminated. And let's say that Central Powers forces had successfully pushed into Russia. This is typically around turn 5. Let's just say they had pushed into Russia. They have to control Poland, control 3 Russian territories, and even contest Moscow. You have to contest Moscow and have all of these requirements in order for the Russian Revolution to actually take place. This optional rule was designed to accurately represent history, even though the Central Powers never actually sieged Moscow and never actually made it to Moscow. This rule was to make it more historically accurate so the Central Powers would have more time to move one territory at a time back over to the west, where the United States would often be flooding in. But with these new rules of economic and political collapse, this rule cannot be used in the tournament rules. These are all of the changes that were made during the tournament rules. I believe the only thing that I'm missing is Russia had 3 troops added to Livonia, and Russia also had 3 troops added to Sevastopol, because Russia had a shortage of troops at the beginning, when the game was first released, and they had to do this to adjust Russia. That's all I have to say. I hope this video was helpful. Any questions, please leave that in the comments, honestly.